Hello everybody, my name is Zen and welcome back to my Star Wars Universe Ranked and Reviewed series where we rank and review all of the Star Wars movies, and then we're going to do the TV shows, and we're going to do that as a separate and combined list. So we will have a full TV show ranking, a full movie ranking, and then a full combined list as well. In this episode, we're going to review Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. We've been going chronologically through the movies, so we've already ranked episode 1, 2, 3, and Solo, and now we're doing Rogue One, and next week is going to be A New Hope, which I'm really excited to jump into. I feel like this episode might end up being a little more divisive than people are going into this expecting, and I think that is going to be exciting because I have had plenty of conversations talking to people about Rogue One, and some people really like Rogue One and some people aren't that hot on it, and I'm going to be kind of curious to see what your takes are. Thank you in the last episode for leaving comments about your thoughts on Solo. Some people think it's their favorite movie and then some people don't, and I feel like that is an interesting thing. Because again, it's one of those very divisive movies where some people like it, some people don't. It's not for everybody, and I like that. In the Star Wars universe, we can have stuff that is kind of all over the place sometimes, because that means that certain people are getting their fix in the Star Wars universe as they would like to see it, and then it always comes around because there's always going to be more movies. Other people get what they want at the same time. It's rare that we get a movie that is universally loved, to be perfectly honest. My current ranking is as follows. It is number 1 is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Number 2 is Solo, A Star Wars Story. Number 3 is Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And number 4 is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I'm going to be honest, I went back and forth quite a bit on whether I wanted Solo to be number 2 or number 3 on the list and just kind of move Star Wars Episode 2 up or down. And I had eventually come to the conclusion that it is number 2. I think that the way that I'm doing this ranking makes things a little bit more difficult, but more fun in the long run. Because as we add movies, I might think that a movie is better than Star Wars Episode 2, but I might not think that it is better than, Solo, right? So you would put it between those two. However, later on, I might think that a movie isn't as bad as Solo, right? It's better than Solo, but I think that maybe I would enjoy Attack of the Clones more. So it kind of changes up how I do the list, and it makes things a little bit more difficult as we go. And it's going to make ranking really fun when we get to the TV shows, because it's like, where the heck do we plant all this stuff? But before we get into talking about Rogue One, I just want to quickly mention that if you want to support this show, support the channel, you could become a channel member by hitting the join button down below. We're running a bit of a supporter drive where I'm trying to get a bunch of supporters by October 15th. We're going to unlock some new stuff on the channel. So if you want to become a channel member, that would really help. Or you could go over to patreon.com/OSWguild and support there if you prefer that. But the more channel supporters we get, the better, because like I said, we unlock different things. If you don't have any bucks to toss my way, totally fine. You can just like the video and leave a comment and watch all the way through to the end. That stuff really, really helps. And of course, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. I've made this series officially a podcast on YouTube. It still is a video, obviously. If you're watching the video portion of this, you totally can. But, its essence is more of a podcast, and it is now listed as such on YouTube, which means you can actually watch it on YouTube or listen to it on YouTube Music if you use that app as well. But let's talk a little bit about Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. It came out December 16th, 2016. I saw it the day of release, and I remember I came back to my friends after watching it. They had not gone with me, and I was like, oh, that was really good. And I kind of talked to them about it and everything. And then I went and saw it again, and I had different thoughts on it the second time. And the more that I watch it, the more different things I take out of this movie, which is fairly interesting. We'll go into that, obviously, as we get into our review of it. It had a budget somewhere between $200 and $265 million, and its box office was $1.058 billion. It made a bunch of money. It was a huge success. And to be perfectly honest, its budget was fairly close to Solo. I mean, it was under the budget of Solo, and it does so much more with its budget in this movie. I think Solo's budget almost like went completely into the Kessel Run. It felt like, whereas this is just amazing from start to finish, where they use their budget wisely, and I like that quite a lot. This is also my first time watching Rogue One since having finished the Andor series. And will it have an effect on this? It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I feel like having seen Andor, which is just an incredible show, it's not even just a good show, it's one of the best shows ever made, I think. And I think that when you take that context and put it into watching this movie, it makes the character of Cassian Andor just way deeper and way more enjoyable to watch. I think a lot of people, who have done this, where they've gone and watched Andor and then they've watched the show or the movie, they kind of go, oh, there's some inconsistencies here with the character. And I don't necessarily agree with that. We'll talk about this, like I said, as we get to those points in the movie. But I do think that it makes Cassian a far better character in this movie, which is totally fine. We see this happen in video games. I've mentioned this before, but I think Dragon Age Inquisition made Dragon Age 2 a better game. And it's one of those weird hindsight things where you play through Dragon Age 2, it's okay, it's not a Dragon Age Origins, and then you go and play through Dragon Age Inquisition, and if you've played through all the DLC for Dragon Age 2, you get through Inquisition, you're like, oh my goodness, Dragon Age 2 is a way better game now that I have played this, because it contextualizes it. And we see this in movies and TV as well, because when you watch through the entirety of the Clone Wars series, it makes the prequels way better. And Dave Filoni does a great job at that. And you know what? He's doing a really good job of that in Ahsoka as we speak. We're currently, next week will be the penultimate episode of Ahsoka, and I very much look forward to that. So if you're not watching that show, definitely go watch it, because we're eventually going to review it anyways. And, there's another thing to note here, which is that before seeing this movie in theaters, I read the Star Wars Catalyst book, which had come out leading up to the movie. It is the lead-in and the tie-in to the movie, and I think that it changed my experience having read that book and then going into the movie, because I had a lot more contextual things that made a lot more sense to me than it did the other people that I was talking with at the time. And I had to kind of like break down what was in the book in order to do that. And I don't necessarily like that. I don't like when, in order to fully enjoy a movie, you have to read through an entire book that is leading into the movie. But at the same time, I like being submersed in the Star Wars universe. So I'm kind of like half and half on it. I'm torn whether or not I think a catalyst should have existed, or if that time should have been given in the movie, explaining a bit of that, a little bit more at least. But that I also don't think that would have worked, and we'll get into that as I talk about pacing issues of this movie. But in the book, Galen is the main character. He's recruited by Krennic to try to make a breakthrough in energy enhancement. The book happens through the Clone Wars and all the way through to the end of the Clone Wars, and eventually Galen is able to continue his research with kyber crystals that are trying to like provide energy to quote unquote Imperial worlds, after the Clone Wars, because the program gets shut down a little bit during the end of the Clone Wars. And he doesn't understand, he doesn't know that it is secretly being used to make a weapon for the Death Star. So he's doing all this research. He doesn't know that it's used to make a weapon. And because of Lyra, his wife, Galen begins to start coming up with these little doubts over his research. Like, what exactly is happening here? I'm glossing over a bunch of events. These are like the uber cliff notes of why these doubts start happening, of these events that are happening within the book. But they do eventually learn that their research is being used to make a weapon. And when that happens, they're like living on Coruscant. And you see actually a little bit of the meeting between Lyra, Krennic, and Galen in the movie, where they do the flashback on Coruscant. But that basically they kind of find out, they realize that Krennic is not who he's trying to act around them, and he's kind of being a giant butthead, and he's obviously using this energy research for a weapon, which isn't great. So they go into hiding with the help of Saw Gerrera, and the book also, I can't gloss over this, but the book features a lot of Tarkin and Krennic fighting with each other, like to try to control the battle station project, and it's freaking awesome, and I loved it. But having that context going into the movie of like, hey, this is all the history of all this stuff that happened between Galen and Krennic, and you're seeing these characters on the screen for the first time that you watch it, it just makes the movie better, for sure, as you would expect. And that's unfortunate, again, because I think that they didn't have the time in the movie to really contextualize a lot of that. You're definitely shown some things, and you're led to conclusions in the movie to base those conclusions off of things that happen in the book, and that's fine, but I just think it's enough. And unfortunately, the movie is already long enough. It's like 2.5 hours long or something. It's over 2 hours long, and they're just flying. They blast through a lot of stuff in this movie. And it has pacing issues because of it, because they tried to fit some of this information from the book into the movie that they had to explain, and it's just, there's a lot going on there. Let's get to some trivia real quick before I actually get into my review. So we get to, towards the end of the movie, see Red Leader and Gold Leader, but this is footage that was unused from A New Hope. They found the footage, and they use that footage in this movie to put Gold Leader and Red Leader, which is why when you watch it, you're like, wow, those guys look straight out of the 70s. It's like, that's because it's footage straight out of the 70s, literally footage that they were going to use for A New Hope. R2 and 3PO appear later in the movie, which means, and this is something I didn't talk about in the previous episode, but let's get into it. It means that Anthony Daniels, the person who plays C-3PO, is the only actor to appear in every Star Wars film. And that is because in Solo, he's one of those really ugly Wookiees on Kessel that Chewbacca frees. So yeah, and because C-3PO and R2 are in this one, it means that he is in every single Star Wars movie, which is great. Whether that continues, I don't know. We're gonna have to find out, because like Dave Filoni's working on his movie. There's like a post sequel trilogy movie coming out, and obviously there is the I think it's like a High Republic movie, or no, it's like the Dawn of the Jedi movie, or whatever they're doing. That's way early in history. Maybe they can have Anthony Daniels in that. He's getting old. He's not gonna be able to carry this on forever. Right. So this movie also features Blue Squadron, which was supposed to be in Star Wars A New Hope. However, the blue color that was on the X-Wings were causing issues with the blue screen techniques they used in 1977. So they changed the color to red, which is why we get Red Squadron in the original movie. And they brought Blue Squadron into this one, and dealt with the consequences of that, of why they're not in the next movie, which is great. I love that there's little throwbacks. And honestly, it's that attention to detail about A New Hope that really makes this movie, and this whole movie is really based on the title crawl of A New Hope, and I like that. So speaking of title crawls, let's get into the movie. Let's jump in to the plot and talk our way through this movie and figure out, is it good or is it bad, or is it somewhere in between? A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it kind of teases you. No title crawl. It just jumps right into the movie. It actually made me jump in the movie theater, because it's just like, I was expecting the normal title crawl music. I don't know why. I think I knew that they weren't going to do one going into the movie, but it made me jump when it's just like the musical sting, and then suddenly a planet. A ship flies ominously through the rings of a mysterious planet down to the surface. A young girl is seen running to her abode, where her mother and father tell her to get her things. It's time. Lyra calls Saw Gerrera and he tells her that she knows what to do. And I love this setup, because it's like, man, you're going in this movie, maybe you don't even know these characters. So like, this is very dramatic. It's really cool. The ship lands, and Galen says goodbye to his little stardust Jin. Galen walks out in front of his farm to confront the soldiers that are walking towards him, and Lyra hides Jin away, telling her to trust the Force, which I felt like was a weird line. In the books, I felt like there was some connection there to the kyber crystals and the Jedi and whatnot, and there's a little bit of political things that they talk about like, oh, were the Jedi good or were they bad, and that kind of stuff. But her just being like, trust the Force, like, where does that come from? It felt out of place for me. Krennic tells Galen that he's been a hard man to find and scoffs at his new profession of farming. He's just like, a man of your talents, and I love that. I think Krennic is played beautifully. What a great bad guy. Galen tells him that it's a peaceful life, but it's lonely since Lyra died, and Krennic tries to comfort him in his like weird way and tells the Death Troopers to search the house. He's like, he just flips a switch. He's like, he's here on a mission. Krennic needs Galen to come back, and that they were this close to providing peace to the galaxy, even though, peace means a weapon, right? Galen tells Krennic that, he's having trouble remembering things in his old days, but he's a terrible liar. Krennic sees right through it. And then in comes Lyra back from the dead. I love Krennic's response. He's like, it's a miracle. It's like he knew. Like, he knew Galen was lying this entire time. I love how this is played because you believe it. You believe that like Krennic is wise to this. Lyra pulls the trigger as she's like pulling out a gun. She pulls the trigger, tries to before that, she tries to convince him that, or he tries to convince them to come with him. Like, he'll even bring the girl, but none of that really is working on them. They don't want to go back. So, yeah, Lyra pulls the trigger, but she's tagged by a bolt, and the Death Troopers just gun her down. And then that's when a mad search for Jyn begins. She's been like hiding away in a secret chamber and is nowhere to be found. Krennic ends up taking Galen, and Jyn is eventually found by Saw after a long wait. And that's when we get the title. And I love that because it felt like it was a subverting of expectations. It was such a strong opening in this movie with this really great scene between these great actors, everybody here just crushed it. I love seeing the Death Troopers for the first time on screen. It was good. This opening to this movie is not just good, it is great. Then we get a look at Jyn, who is older and imprisoned, presumably for doing rebel-y things with Saw Gerrera, which is great. We'll talk about Saw in a moment because I love his character. But this movie starts jumping around a lot at this point. And it's so much so that they have to put little titles to tell you where they're at because they are just going places and you can't recognize it. They're not going to take the time to explain it to you. It's just like, here's a new planet, here's a new planet, here's a new planet, here's a new place, here's a new place. And it's just, it feels kind of breakneck speed. So, meanwhile, at the Ring of Carfrini, I think is how it's pronounced, it's a trading outpost, apparently. A young spy named Cassian Andor is receiving information from an informant about a planet-killer weapon that the Empire is building. He got the information from an Imperial pilot who has defected. The informant is injured, however, when we meet him, the Empire is closing in on them, and in order to prevent this information getting out, Cassian shoots him and the stormtroopers before making a break for it. And I like that we get to see how Cassian will instinctively do something that needs to be done before even thinking about it. He leaves the thinking till later, and we see this happen multiple times in Andor. And it's a great thing. He's just like, walks up to the informant. He's just like, hey, calm down. Like, calm down. Then blam, just shoots him. And then you see that moment on his face where he like realizes, oh crap, this is something I had to do. Now I have to deal with the thoughts of this. And then he takes off. And we'll talk about that when we get to Andor. But yeah, it's great because it happens in that show a lot. And again, in moments that make you jump because you're not expecting it. And yeah, I love that his character feels like he still behaves the same as he does in the show. Meanwhile, on Jeddah, the pilot defector is taken to Saw Gerrera. However, Saw is becoming very paranoid after years of leading insurgency. The pilot is secretly taken to Saw by being like bagged over his head and whatnot. And I love this because you get the feeling like there is paranoia there. We haven't seen Saw yet. We see his dudes. We see old Tube Face from Solo, which is great. And I like that these characters, some of these characters from Saw's group, we also see back in the Andor series. Because again, Andor happens before this movie does, right? It's a lead into this movie, so it's cool to see some returning characters. However, on the planet of Wobani, again, we're jumping to a new planet, at Imperial Labor Camp, Jin is on her way to, work, quote unquote. When the transport is stopped, rebels have broken Jin out. She tries to make a run for it and is stopped by K2SO. I love his line, "Congratulations, you are being rescued. Please do not resist." It's just like a laser out. On Yavin 4, Jin is taken to the Rebel Alliance headquarters, and the rebels reveal that they know who she is. She's the daughter of Galen Urso, and Cassian asks when the last time she was in contact with her father and Saw Gerrera. It's apparently been a long time. She reveals that Saw raised her, though, and the rebels need to meet with Saw, so they try to make this deal with her. So, because they can't make the meeting themselves, due to Saw being a crazy extremist at this point, they have no way of gaining, trust in him to meet with them and the Rebel Alliance. He just, their only point of contact is through Jin. So they try to get Jin to be like, "Hey, can you please allow yourself to be introduced back to Saw so you can be like, hey, you got to meet with these rebels," right? That's their whole plan here. But we hear more about this Imperial defector claiming that the Emperor is making a weapon to destroy whole planets, which is crazy, and that he was sent by Galen Urso to warn the rebels. And obviously he's with Saw now. So Jin must find her father so that he can testify to the Senate. This is what Mon Mothma is trying to say, hey, bring your father back here so he can testify that the Emperor is trying to make this. He could talk to the Senate, try to break this information out there. And Andor's commander later, as they go to leave, tells Galen, tells Andor that Galen needs to die. He needs to be eliminated due to being vital to this program. Just take him out. That's his little spy mission. Jin goes to the ship. K2SO calls out that Jin is getting a blaster while he doesn't. And Cassian shows up and is forced to trust Jin with the weapon, which is an interesting moment because we know that at this point, Andor isn't necessarily the most trustworthy person. He's going to do what needs to be done, and he's going to possibly follow these orders that he was given. And so he's letting Jin have this weapon, knowing that she might be a liability to this mission, but at the same time, she's going to have to defend herself. He understands why she may need a weapon, and K2 is not super happy on that. He informs Cassian that the probability of using her weapon against Cassian is high, very high. And yeah, this movie is moving at this point. We're just jumping scenes all over the place. We go back to Saw. He's crazy, paranoid, as I said, from all of the insurgencies he's been running. Lies, deceptions. I think Forrest Whitaker does an amazing job in this movie playing crazy Saw. And if you don't know, Saw's story begins way back in the Clone Wars series. I highly recommend going and watching Clone Wars if you haven't. Again, we're going to be reviewing it in the future, but the fact that Saw is from there and we get to see his whole story arc over the course of TV shows and movies and whatnot is great. And video games, because he's in the Fallen Order movie or game as well. So the thing with this is Saw Gerrera was trained by Anakin and Obi-Wan and Rex and Ahsoka, basically, to be an insurgent on the planet that he is a part of when the Separatists were occupying his planet. And he takes that training with him all the way through. We get to see him not so crazy, but getting to that point in Andor, and that's a great moment. We get some freaking phenomenal scenes with him in that show, and then we get to see him kind of losing his mind a little bit as he's not really sure who to trust after all of these years. And he goes from running insurgencies against the Separatists to running insurgencies against the Empire. I think at this point he's seen so much stuff that this is what leads his character to being the way it is, and it totally makes sense for me. I'm all in for it. Some people are like, it doesn't make sense how he goes from who he is in the Clone Wars to who he is here, but for me, I see the threads. Jin awakes, though, as they come into orbit over Jeddah. They descend onto the surface just outside of Jeddah City, which is being occupied by the Empire. There's such a cool shot of the Star Destroyer above the city. We get a bit of a parallel with this in Ahsoka, which is also great. Again, go watch Ahsoka. but only after you've watched Rebels, because I think it's going to make it a better show for you. The Empire, though, is shipping out kyber crystals from within the city. Obviously, they are, because they need them to make the weapon more functional, as we kind of learn a little bit in the book, and then later in the movie. We jump around again because, before this, K2, he gets left behind. That's fine. There's a cute little scene here. I think Alan Tudyk does a great job as K2. By the way, I'm just going to mention I love K2 as a droid. So if I'm coming off very negative about his character, don't hear that. I think he's really, really great. I'm just jumping over the stuff that doesn't matter here. He gets left behind. We jump back to Saw's place where the Bogollet can feel the thoughts of the informant. No lie is safe. This creature goes to work. And apparently there's a downside. He may be losing his mind afterwards, which is weird and crazy. And I don't like this creature. Not because I don't like the idea of it. I like the idea of it. I just don't think it is done very well in this movie. Jyn and Cassian then enter the city. We're just jumping all over, and run into two men from the cantina on Tatooine. Yeah, that is where they're from. If you recognize them when they bump into them, and they're like, hey, watch where you're going. Yeah, they're from A New Hope on Tatooine. So they're there now, apparently. They're going to leave Jeddah before things happen, and that's where they go, and things don't end up great for them there either. The city is crawling with stormtroopers, and Jyn chats with a man named Chirrut, who's a blind man and is apparently one of the guardians of the Wills. You might ask what that is. Well, they were at the Jeddah, or the Jedi temples on Jeddah, basically guarding it and protecting the stuff there. And well, now that the kyber crystals are being taken and the Empire is occupying here, there's no reason to protect it anymore. So he's kind of out on the streets just doing what most people would assume are parlor tricks, but he is connected to the Force somehow. He says that the strongest stars have hearts of kyber, right before Jyn is pulled away by Cassian, as he lets her know that this town is about to blow. The fuse is set. There's a lot going on. Jyn spots insurgents about to attack an Imperial convoy, and a fight breaks out. Jyn and Cassian are separated as she tries to save a child from all the crossfire. Jyn takes cover near this tank, and Cassian prevents a rebel from tossing a grenade her way, which is great, but Saw's rebels see that happen, see them shoot this insurgent, and they go in hot pursuit of them. They're cornered by some stormtroopers, and Jyn is able to take a bunch out. It's a really cool scene where she just whacks them all with her little stick and then shoots a couple. I think this is one of the moments where I was like, wow, Jyn is a cool character. I wasn't sure of it up until this point, and then I'm like, this is cool. I liked that scene. And then she also shoots the security droid as it walks around the corner, and then right behind that security droid as it falls down, K2 appears. It says, did you know that wasn't me? And I loved it. Sassy droid being sassy. Again, I love Alan Tudyk. The three of them come across a group of stormtroopers, and K2 tries to convince the troopers that he is escorting Jyn and Cassian as prisoners. But just before things get violent with the troopers, Chirrut comes out to confront them. He shows off his freaking amazing skills as a blind person. It's one of the best moments in this movie. There's a lot of good moments, though. He even has a little funny one-liner where he hits somebody with a stick and he says, is your foot all right? I love it. I love seeing him just go to town here and seeing that even though he is blind, he is not down and out. Which is great because this isn't the first time that we see a blind person in Star Wars doing cool stuff with the Force, and being able to fight properly. We also see this with, I don't know if I want to spoil this, actually. We see it somewhere in Rebels. I'm actually going to leave that out because I think that there's plenty of people who haven't seen Rebels, but you should go watch it. There's a blind person that ends up being a character in there, and I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to spoil it. More troopers then run in, and Chirrut's buddy Baze takes them out with his heavy repeater. K2 is sent back to the ship, and Saw's rebels take the four of them prisoner after Jyn lets them know that she is the daughter of Galen Erso. And I love the moment where they put the bag over Chirrut's head, and he says, are you kidding me? I'm blind. I love it. But, he did just take all those troopers, so can they really trust him on that one? One little note here. This is a side note. When we were leading up to the launch of this movie, at the Star Wars celebration before this movie came out. I was watching it. They do like panels and whatnot where they have the actors talk about their characters and whatnot. It was at this point in my journey with Star Wars that I was so hyped because, episode 7 was a thing. We were getting Rogue One. We knew we were getting other movies, and I was at the peak hype for Star Wars, right? And I was watching this panel for Rogue One, and they had the actor who plays Baze. They asked him a question about like his relationship with Chirrut and like how what's going on there and everything. And I just remember this so vividly. He let it slip in this interview, and on the stage where there are all of these other actors from the show, from the movie, and in front of a live audience and a live stream, that, Baze has to deal with the fact that later in the movie when Chirrut is killed, and it's just that moment of him leaving that spoiler out there, which, by the way, kind of sucks. I mean, absolutely sucks. It wasn't him intentionally trying to do that. The actor who plays Baze, I believe, is a Chinese actor. His English isn't super great, and they did a good job with him in the movie. I really like his character, but it was this awkward moment, and the rest of the cast on that panel just like tried to shush him and like to be like, no, and it was really awkward, and that has stuck with me this entire time. It feels real bad because that's not the only time that this has happened in recent years with big movie releases. Like I think there was something with what's his face who plays Spider-Man, and there's been a lot of weird leaks like that where it's unintentional, and it happens. I get it. It's just weird. Anyways, I like Baze. But with that aside, let's jump into the movie again. The Imperials begin to vacate the city abruptly, and our protagonists are brought to Saw. Cassian, Baze, and Chirrut are placed in cells. And Chirrut has this interesting line. It's going to kind of go back to something we were talking about earlier, where he says, "Relax, Captain, we've all been in worse cages than this one." Cassian says, "This is a first for me," which is interesting. Because as we know from Andor, that is not the case. My read on this is he's trying to be a spy and not give away too much information. So that's just something that he's saying as an handed thing. However, side note, it also is a kind of a weird plot hole, and I'm having to explain it away. Like that shouldn't be a thing, but it's okay for them to do stuff like that, I suppose. Maybe it'll be explained in season 2 of Andor. I don't know, whenever that comes out because of the writer's strike. But yeah, it is kind of a weird moment that people go, oh, there's a disconnect here between the show Andor and the movie. Again, maybe he's just saying it because he's a spy and he's trying not to give too much information, but that seems like a weird explanation. Anyway, so Chirrut says, "There is more than one sort of prison, Captain. I sense that you will carry yours with you wherever you go." And I love that line. It's great. And you can see it actually affects him. Jyn is brought in front of Saw, and they're able to reunite. Saw apparently had left her behind at some point, and he was certain that she would be fine. And then it kind of hits him. He's like, today of all days, is it a trap? It was just kind of cool because he's so paranoid. He's like, did they send you? Did you come here to kill me? I love that. Because he wasn't sure about the whole thing with the pilot's message and her arrival. And it's just all kind of convenient. It's right, it is. But, the Force works in mysterious ways, right? Jyn got the rebels an introduction, right? She's like, cool, I've introduced you. Now I'm out. I don't want to deal with you anymore. She cares not about this cause since it's only ever brought her pain. She chooses to ignore the Imperial reign rather than fight against it. And then we jump again on board the Death Star. Krennic begins the weapon test as Tarkin informs him that the Emperor is awaiting his report. They target Jeddah City and prepare a single reactor ignition, which is so cool. The Imperial pilot is in the next cell to the other 3, as we find out. He seems quite out of it after his run-in with the Borgullet. Cassian gets him to kind of come back to reality a little bit, snaps him back to it, and asks the pilot where Galen is. We jump back over. Saw shows Jyn her father's message, little holocron message. There's a bunch of information, and it's totally intentional that this is rushed. Like, you as a viewer, this is actually a great scene, because you as a viewer are trying to take in all the information that he's saying, but there's so much other stuff happening. You know, we got the weapon being fired. We've got Jin having all of this emotion of seeing her father for the first time and hearing him for the first time since the fateful day back on the farm and being left behind. And she's going through all of that emotion. She's trying to process it, and it's done really well because you are basically in her shoes, where there's so much going on in this scene and you're trying to process it, but you don't have enough time to do so, which is great. We learn that Galen, though, has built a flaw into the Death Star in order to make up for his sins. Jin is overwhelmed with being able to see her father again, and then the Death Star blocks out the sun, fires on Jeddah City just as the message ends. You kind of get the feeling that it was because of the attack that the message gets blocked out. Maybe some kind of radiation, I don't know. Something happens which destroys the message or blocks it. And now it's time to flee because there's a big wave of land coming towards them, and it's a lot of information to process, which again is intentional because it makes you feel like you're in the shoes of Jin in that moment. The prisoners escape, and K2 has their ship standing by. He says, "There's a problem on the horizon." There is no horizon. I love that. But Saw knows that it's the end, and he's kind of accepted his fate, which is kind of strange because the Saw that we know and love, I don't think would do this. But then again, the Saw that he is now, maybe he would. And we do get a little bit of a hint that Saw is limping, so maybe he just knows that he's not going to be able to make it out in time. I don't know. Again, that feels like I'm having to explain away something that shouldn't necessarily be there or should be better explained in the movie. We get a great moment with Krennic back on the Death Star as they're all just looking at this silent explosion on the planet, and he just says, "Oh, it's beautiful." I love that. It is the perfect contrary or a contrast between what is actually happening on the planet with our heroes and what they get to see from orbit out of this, the safety. Our heroes then jump on the ship, barely escape the incoming wave of destruction, and Tarkin apologizes to Krennic. His work has exceeded all expectations. Tarkin's going to go tell the Emperor that this weapon will be bringing a swift end to the rebellion. And then there's a moment where it kind of flips and he goes, "And I'll be taking control over this project effective immediately." Because the pilot, the defector, came from Edu, which was Galen's facility. And despite the informant presumably being destroyed just now, he did not act alone. So, there's obviously more to this, and Tarkin doesn't trust Krennic. Tarkin also is a greedy Imperial, and he wants he wants to improve his position within the Empire as he continues to do, which is why he's where he currently is. We also get to see a bit of Tarkin in the Clone Wars as well. So if you go back and watch that, you get some history with him and how he acts and why he is the way he is, which is great. But he's totally taken this project away from Krennic. Krennic kind of stomps away in anger. Cassian and the crew head to Edu to find Galen. We learn that the defector's name is Bodhi as he introduces himself to Jin. Galen told him that he could make things right and that he could get right with himself by going and getting this message out. Jin says that she has seen her father's message. There's a way to defeat the Death Star, and Galen had built only one flaw into it. Cassian is super skeptical, as he should be, right? Because of this quote-unquote message. Nobody saw the message. Only Jin saw it. She does not have the message, and Bodhi did not see it either. So they're all kind of like, well, we just kind of have to trust you on this. Except Cassian, he's like, oh, I can't put my faith in this. The crew arrives at Edu in a terrible storm. They put it down real hot after colliding with some terrain, and the rebels send a squadron to Edu after the comms link with Cassian's ship goes dead. Cassian needs to go up on a ridge to check out the facility, and he goes equipped with a sniper rifle, and you sense that something's up. Obviously, his mission is to kill Galen. True asks if Cassian looks like a killer when he exits the ship, because he feels the force moving darkly around him, which is apparently something that happens to someone who is about to kill. Great moment, actually. I really love this because that is what sets off like the next series of events. Because Jin then takes off after Cassian, but sees the elevator leading up to the facility, so she heads that way. Chirrut and Baze follow Jin. Cassian gets a bead on the landing platform with his rifle, where the scientists are being escorted out by stormtroopers, and Galen is among them. And Bodhi identifies him to Cassian, which this is all great. I love the tension here. Krennic arrives at the facility with his death troopers and lets Galen know that the station is complete. And he gathers the scientists and says that one of them has betrayed the Empire, urging the traitor to step forward. And then when none of them step forward, because none of them are the traitor, Krennic orders the death troopers to kill them all. But Galen steps in front of that and reveals himself as the traitor. Cassian nearly takes the shot during this, but he backs down. He decides not to, for whatever reason. Krennic ends up killing the scientists anyways and slaps Galen to the ground, and then he informs Galen that the weapon test was successful as Jin sneaks on top of the landing platform behind them. K2 tells Cassian that the rebels are about to arrive and that he tries to stop them from blasting the platform, but it's too late. They can't get the message there in time. The rebels, the X-Wing attack happens. And it's kind of this moment of helplessness where they're like saying like, hey, the Jin is on the platform. Like, we have people on the platform. Do not blow it up. And it's too late. Jin tries to reach her father, who is injured in the attack as the facility fights back. Chirrut shows some amazing marksman skills with his crazy staff weapon thing. He shoots down a TIE fighter. It's amazing. Krennic escapes, and Jin is able to have a few final words with her father as he passes away. This is a cool little scene, but it does kind of feel a little weird. It's like, I don't know. I kind of wish that they could have a little bit more of a conversation here, but I understand why it didn't happen. Like, either have more or less, but it's totally fine with what it is. It was not super great. It wasn't bad or anything, but yeah, it's just middling to me. Cassian then escorts Jin away from all the destruction because he gets up there somehow. It's really fast, apparently. Escorts her away, and the crew gets away in a stolen Imperial cargo ship. Jin confronts Cassian, knowing that he was going to kill her father. Cassian, of course, denies it, but she knows the truth. He had every chance to pull the trigger, he said. He didn't. Rebel Alliance bombers are what killed Galen, and Cassian disobeyed his orders. And he says, suddenly the rebellion is real to you, but some of us live it. And it is kind of a cool moment thinking back to watching through the Andor series, and you kind of get a little bit more of his life, especially like everything that he goes through with being a spy and the rebellion and everything in Andor. Like, I love this particular moment here because you kind of see that weight on him, even though that show was not a reality when this was written. So it's kind of like a hindsight thing that they've written that in, and it looks great. They then, of course, set course to Yavin 4, which, as you would expect, they have to go running back with their tails between their legs. Mission was unsuccessful. Krennic goes to Mustafar, kind of in the same way, tail between his legs. He goes to Vader's castle. Vader's brought out of his back-to-tank to meet with Krennic, and Krennic grovels to Vader about delivering the weapon that the Emperor requested. He says, its power to create problems is certainly confirmed, which is a great line. Then Vader says, there is no Death Star. The Senate has been informed that Jedha was destroyed in a mining disaster. I expect you not to rest until you can assure the Emperor that Galen Erso has not compromised this weapon in any way. Again, more great lines from Vader. James Earl Jones sounded really old doing the voice. And then he does this funny thing. Krennic goes, so I'm still in command? You'll speak to the Emperor about... And then it just getting force choked, and I love it. But then the dumb line happens that I still laughed at because it was funny when it first happened, where Vader says, be careful not to choke on your aspirations, Director. I love it and I hate it at the same time. I don't know. Let me know what you guys feel about that line. It's great, though. It does kind of feel like something that Anakin would say, so it's great. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like something Vader would say. So it's not great. So that's where I'm like middled on it, but I enjoy it. Very confusing. Meanwhile, on Yavin 4, the rebels feel the need to scatter the fleet. Their panic is setting in. They can't deal with this Death Star. They have no idea what's going on. Some of them are trying to just turn tail and run. Some don't even believe that the Death Star even exists. Others feel it's too powerful for them to have any chance, and Jin convinces some of them that they need to head to Scarif to get the plans to the Death Star. And then this whole scene in this command room, I feel like is missing some characters, some key characters. I understand why they're not there based on when this movie was made, but if it were made today, you would have characters like Hera Syndulla in this room, which would have been great. I'm sure there's several other rebels that you might have seen here, maybe even Ahsoka. I don't know. You would have had a bunch of people here in this room that are very important to the rebellion that we don't see here. And it's unfortunate, but again, I understand because when the movie was made, these kind of things were still kind of niche, and we weren't in the era of Star Wars that we're in now. Jin and her crack team of rebels, they band together and head to Scarif after having this conversation with Cassian. Well, we get a really great monologue from him about being on the more unforgivable end of the rebellion, doing things that he was not proud of. And I love it. And then this whole third act of the movie is just incredible. And it's also conveniently where everybody forgives all the problems from the first two acts. It's still awesome, don't get me wrong, but like this is the good part of the movie. Everything before this had good parts to it, but it wasn't great. It's like, yes, from a writing perspective, the first two acts set up the third act. That is what they do. In this, that is exactly what happens. Unfortunately, the first act and the second act happen at such breakneck speed that we don't get enough time with these particular characters to get them fleshed out, which is really hard to do when you have a cast this size. You get a lot from Cassian, but you don't get enough, in my opinion. You get a lot from Jin, but you don't get enough. You're not necessarily sympathetic or unsympathetic towards these characters going in. And unfortunate for me, I think that the third act needs you to love these characters for the ending to have a massive effect on you. Instead, that effect is shifted off of these characters who eventually die at the end of this movie. We know they die. Everybody knew they were going to die because they're not in the next movie. But the thing is, because the focus, is on them in this movie, you should feel a huge connection to them by the time you get to their death scenes. And for some you do, for some you don't. You just don't have enough time with the pilot. You barely have enough time with Chirrut and Baze. Like when Baze goes down, it's okay. When Chirrut goes down, you're like, oh my goodness, he was so cool. It sucks. And then when K2 goes down, you're like, oh no, I really love this droid. But like Cassian and Jin, their death scene is kind of like okay. Like I saw that happening. I don't feel anything. And it's this weird thing for me personally. And I feel like the sins of this movie are the first two acts, and everybody forgets about those sins the moment they get to the third act because it is so good. So Mon Mothma and Bail Organa hatch a plan to help the renegade rebels as they arrive on Scarif. And as they do, they're using their Imperial shuttle to try to sneak in. They're able to make their way through the access gate and down to the planet's surface. The whole concept of the gate is awesome, but it leaves a lot of questions to how exactly it works, like where are they getting the power for this thing. It's cool, though. Jin gives a motivational speech to the rebels on board the ship. The Empire has no idea they are coming. They've no reason to expect us. If we make it to the ground, we will take the next chance and the next, and on until we win or the chances are spent. I love that. It's a really, really good line. A plan is hatched. Everyone knows their parts. The crew subdues the inspection team that comes out when they land. Cassian and Jin use their uniforms to infiltrate the Dish facility. Krennic has also arrived on Scarif, conveniently, and the rebels make their way discreetly off the ship and into position right before Cassian, K2, and Jin go into the facility. Cassian is going to do the classic, I've got a bad feeling about this, but he's cut off by them. I love that. I think it's cute. Every movie has, I got a bad feeling about this. So the fact that this one is kind of cut off, I liked it because this was the first non-trilogy movie that had ever come out. And I think it works. It does the fun little nods, but at the same time, it's, it's respecting the sanctity, you might call it, of these other three trilogies. K2 ends up slicing into the system. to find where Cassian and Jin must go. The rebels take out some stormtroopers guarding different landing platforms and place explosive charges. Krennic wants all of the dispatches ever sent by Galen Erso, which seems like a big ask based on the way that people respond to that. Once the path for Jin and Cassian is known, the order is given and the charges are set off. It's a great moment where they're all in this tower looking out with Krennic, and he turns around and says, "Are we blind? Deploy the garrison." Great line from him. In fact, the deploy the garrison line, it makes it into Star Wars Legion. It is one of his command cards for Star Wars Legion, which is great. I love this. I love the character of Krennic. Tarkin is then informed that Scarif is under attack, and he prepares the Death Star for a jump to hyperspace. It's actually the first confirmation that we have that the Death Star can jump into hyperspace, which is a crazy idea when you consider it. The rebels back on Yavin 4 pick up on Imperial chatter about a battle on Scarif. They give the order to send ships to help fight, and we get a brief look at R2 and 3PO, as we mentioned earlier during our trivia. Meanwhile, the rebels on Scarif are making it seem like there are far more enemies than there really are, and Bodhi adds to the chaos by jumping on the comms and trying to confuse the Imperials. Jin and Cassian make it to the database as an ATST arrives at Baze and Chirrut's position, but the rebel fleet also arrives. Blue, Gold, and Red Squadron all join in. I love this moment. Blue Squadron is able to mostly make it through the shield before it is locked down. And this whole space battle, by the way, is 10 out of 10. It is perfect. I love it. It feels like the original trilogy, and at the same time, it is perfect. Because the gate is closed, they will need to transmit the Death Star plans instead of flying them out. Bodhi needs to inform the fleet that they need to destroy the gate so the information can be fully sent out, and he must link the transport ship into their system. It's good timing, though, because reinforcements arrive on the ground from Blue Squadron as the space battle heats up. K2 is able to locate the tape that they need with the Death Star plans, but Cassian and Jin have to manually extract the information from the data tower. Troopers arrive, and K2 has to seal out Jin and Cassian, and he defeats the troopers that come in. He also takes a shot in the shoulder in the process, not mortally wounding him, but definitely making it so he is less effective. Jin ends up finding Project Stardust and that's exactly what she's looking for. Bodhi is trying to link to the tower when the troopers find him, and a firefight breaks out. He is minorly injured during this. K2 helps Cassian and Jin find where the Project Stardust actually is. We get to see it on the tower, but the system loses power, conveniently, and they must now have to climb the data tower to get the data out. K2 takes a fatal wound just before locking the tower behind them, and Krennic is informed of the unauthorized access to the data vault, so he starts making his way there. There's a lot going on here, and it's all freaking epic. I love all this action. Bodhi makes a run for the ship with the data cable, manages to link it in and send a message. Blue Squadron is then taken out as the rebels on the ground are forced to engage with Death Troopers. Melchi is then hit. Melchi, by the way, from Andor. He is one of the characters in Andor that we get introduced to and get a lot more backstory on. It's kind of funny that he's just like this side character in this movie and ends up becoming a main character in the show. But he manages to inform the rest of the team about the master switch that they need to hit so the shuttle can transmit the message to the rebel fleet. Jin and Cassian begin climbing as Krennic arrives and hits Cassian with a bolt, and he falls down. You assume he's going to die. He sounds like he hits so many metal things on the way down. You're like, okay, well, there's Cassian dead. Chirrut begins to chant as he makes his way to the master switch, avoiding blaster fire on the way in an impossible way, and it's great. He flips the switch, and Bodhi gets the message out, but Chirrut is wounded in the process. Baze runs over to try to save his friend and is forced to get revenge because he dies, which is an awesome scene with Baze just going all out. Jin continues to climb to the top of the tower, and Bodhi and the transport ship are destroyed by a lofted grenade, which sucks because there's Bodhi gone, and there's their way out gone. Baze is finally taken down after a valiant fight against a bunch of Death Troopers, which is epic. And then we get back up into space where Y-Wings are shooting ion torpedoes and hit one of the Star Destroyers, and they get an idea. They send in the Hammerhead Corvette, which rams and disables the destroyer, causing it, or it rams the disabled destroyer, causing it to hit another destroyer and plunge down into the shield, which eventually blows it up. Some things that happen in between that and this, but everything's jumping around so fast, it's hard to break this up. Jin eventually makes it to the top of the tower after getting through just the most inconvenient, air hole thing that keeps closing real fast and opening. It's like, did OSHA have any say in this? Like space OSHA? Because this is dangerous. But I love it. The stakes are really high and they just keep going up and up. Literally, because she finally makes it to the top of the tower to transmit the data. But she must reset the antenna alignment out on the catwalk, which she runs over there. I find this interesting because in the trailers that we saw for the movie, she runs out to the tower and a TIE fighter pops up. So it is totally a deleted scene where something else clearly happens there, but it's very cool. So she runs over, is able to get the dish realigned and starts trying to do the data, but not before a blaster or a shot from one of the TIE fighters or TIE interceptors or whatever it was. I don't remember exactly which hit the catwalk, makes her start falling. And she's able to slowly climb back up, but is confronted by Krennic, who has also made it to the top. And I love his line of, "Who are you?" He's just like so pissed off about this whole situation. He has no idea who she is. And she lays out the whole plot of the movie to him. You know, he thinks he's won. He starts like monologuing, but then he's shot by Cassian. They get to transmit the data to the Rebel fleet, and it happens really quick. And at this point in the movie, I always thought, like, why wouldn't you just send, like, the shield is down? Like, oh, okay, cool, the shield is down. Let's go get our guys out, right? Wouldn't you just, like, send a ship or two quick down to pick them up and just get out? But then again, it is pretty dire up in space at the moment with everything going on. So I get why they don't. Also, the transmission happens very quickly, which is kind of surprising. The Death Star then arrives. You see it on the horizon, and Tarkin decides to target the base on Scarif with another single reactor ignition. Jin and Cassian have some kind of romantic moment, which is odd, but you can also kind of understand it. And Krennic can see his creation on the horizon. I love this because then he is hoisted by his own petard as the Death Star shoots the top of the tower clean off. It is beautiful. It is such a cool moment. And I remember being in the theater and having everybody just like gasp of how like amazing that was. It's like boom headshot, really, when you think about it. The Rebel fleet begins jumping to hyperspace just as Vader arrives, and so the ships bounce off of Vader's Star Destroyer, which is super cool. Jin and Cassian know it's the end as they see this giant explosion headed their way. They sit on the beach and wait for it to arrive. It's kind of a touching moment. It's also sad in a way, but at the same time, you're like, man, I wish I cared more about these characters. I need a show, right? And leading up to Andor, the show, I always kind of thought like, oh, it's going to be cool, but do we really need to know more about Cassian Andor? And then we got the show and I'm like, wow, we really did. And it makes a huge difference. And now, before I was even thinking like, I don't really care to learn more about Jin, even after having read the Catalyst book, even though she's not really a main character in that. But now I'm kind of like, man, I kind of want a show about Jin and Saw's like adventures. I think that would be pretty cool. Maybe. I think Felicity also does a great job as Jin, but some people don't seem to like her. So it's another one of those divisive things. Anyways, Vader prepares a boarding party for the disabled rebel ship that has received the transmission from Scarif, and so begins one of the top moments in all of Star Wars history, and it's freaking incredible. The rebels desperately take this data disk toward their escape ship, but are unable to make it through a jammed door. Vader arrives, ignites his lightsaber in the super cool scene, and just absolutely wrecks face. I love this moment because it shows the true power of Darth Vader as it was meant to be seen, and not something they could do back in the original trilogy. It's fantastic. We see stuff like this happen in other extended media, such as the games, and we even see very similar shots happen in other shows where they're kind of taking inspiration on it because it is so cool. It is legitimately one of the top moments in all of Star Wars, and I love it. And I love that this data disc keeps getting handed off at the last moment, like inch by inch. It even goes into the director's hands, which I think is funny that they have a little like a moment for him to be in the movie. And then it finally reaches Leia's ship as it managed to just get away in time. The plans are taken to the bridge and handed over to Leia. And someone asks, what is it they've sent us? And she says, hope. And it's so stupid. And we get a really bad shot of CGI Leia, but that's it. And then boom, the end of the movie. Literally, this movie ends perfectly for you to start watching A New Hope directly afterwards. And most people do. They watch this and they go, man, I want to watch A New Hope. And they go and watch that because it just ties straight into it. It's like this movie ends as the other movie starts. And it's great. 10 out of 10. All right, let's talk about this. So I have mentioned my issues with the first two acts and its pacing. And when this movie first came out, I agreed with a lot of people that it was one of the best Star Wars movies. I rated it quite highly. And the more that I watch this movie, the more I see through the more that I see its issues that it has, and the more I start disliking it. However, it is still a fantastic movie with amazing moments. The whole third act is almost perfect, in my opinion, as good as you're going to get. But the first two acts really, really slow things down and hurt it. There was a point in the first two acts when I first saw the movie that I even had the conscious thought in the movie theater where I was like, is this a bad movie? I'm not enjoying this as I should be. Is this a bad movie? And that gives you a pretty good indication that I was not enjoying it during those first two acts. I believe it was still like it was just before going into the second act with Galen and the facility and all that. But I was like, wow, there's really cool moments here, but it's kind of is weird and I'm not sure I'm liking this. And that was back then. And now when I watch through that first two acts, it's a struggle, but I know there's payoff. I know that the payoff is the third act. So I watched all the way through and then I really, really enjoy that third act because it is literal perfection. And I'm torn on this. I don't know how to gauge that. And then we have the complication now if I've watched Andor and I think more highly of this movie after watching Andor. So it's in a weird spot for me. So let's look at our ranking and figure out where it deserves to be. So to recap, at number 1, we have Star Wars Episode 3. At number 2, we have Solo. At number 3, we have Star Wars Episode 2. And at number 4, we have Star Wars Episode 1. Well, let's do some deductive reasoning here, I think, to put this in perspective. Is it better than Star Wars Episode 1? Yes, absolutely. Star Wars Episode 1 is garbage. Is it better than Star Wars Episode 2? Yes, absolutely. I'm not that hot on Star Wars Episode 2. So then we start getting into a complicated thing. Is it better than Solo, a Star Wars story? I think so, yeah. I think Solo is really not that bad, but Rogue One is a better movie, for sure, and has better moments, and is more iconic, in my opinion. More people rate Rogue One more highly than Solo, and I agree with that. I think Rogue One is a better movie than Solo. Specifically, the third act. I think there are parts in the first act that aren't as good as parts in Solo, but that's fine. That's not really going to change the thing here. So it is better than those three bottom movies. Is it better than Star Wars Episode 3? That's a tough one. This is when things start getting really tough because I really like Episode 3. And the more that I watch it, I really like it because I feel like even though the third act of Rogue One is nearly perfect, I think the third act of Episode 3 is also nearly perfect. I absolutely love everything between Anakin and Obi-Wan and their fight, the duel of the fates, the crazy fight scene that happens between them, but also the dialogue and the emotion. And then you get that moment with Anakin laying on the ground and he does the "I hate you." And the acting is so good at the end of that movie. And even the stuff towards the beginning of that movie, you question, you're like, Mace Windu, why are you such an idiot? You know, why are you going through with this thing that is actually leading Anakin to be not a great person? You're making the situation worse rather than helping the situation. There's a lot of frustrating things that happen at the beginning of that movie in the first act and into the second act that I get the same kind of annoyances here with Rogue One. So I think they're very close of which one I think is better, because my enjoyment of them is pretty high, right? We're like we're arguing whether or not something is not just good, but if it's great at this point, because both of these movies are really good. But which one ekes it out? That is the key. Well, I think after some consideration, I am going to now put it at number 2. So it will go, our final ranking for this episode is Star Wars Episode 3, number 1. Number 2, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Number 3, Solo, A Star Wars Story. Number 4, Star Wars Episode 2. And number 5, Star Wars Episode 1. I just think that I like the performances of the Emperor and Anakin and Obi-Wan more than I like the third act of this movie. I think the third act of this movie, as I have said multiple times, is near perfect, but it doesn't make up for the first 2 acts enough. And I have to consider that even though I really, really like Andor, and I think it makes this movie better, that's not part of this movie. And so I have to kind of gauge this movie on its own merits, which I think is below Revenge of the Sith. Now, people are going to be angry at me for that. And some people are going to agree. And that's the best part of this. So let me know in the comments where you put it on my list or where you put it on your list. Do you agree? Do you think episode 3 is better or do you not? This is when things are going to start getting interesting, because we're going to start getting into the original trilogy and the sequels, and where do those fall? And they may make people really angry. And I love that. That's the greatness of the system that we're doing here, and how things will rank, and whether you agree with me or not is awesome. But that is going to do it for this week. Next Thursday, we will have the review of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And I am really looking forward to seeing what you guys think of that. And I'm really looking forward to rewatching and being critical of that movie, because it has been a while and I've not placed it on a ranking list for quite some time. So I'm really curious to see what I end up thinking about it, especially after watching these other movies and how we rank it. So double check that you have watched Episode 4 before going into the next movie. And heck, even watch Rogue One and lead right into Episode 4 and just have a good time this next week. I think that's what you should do this weekend. You should treat yourself to some Star Wars. But with all that being said, thank you for watching all the way through. Thank you for commenting, liking, and subscribing. And we shall see you all next time.